to take a moment to introduce our speaker today. Our speaker is Joe Stevens, and he's a master docent with the Desert Caballeros Western Museum in Wickenburg. So you're all here to get some Wickenburg history today, and I'm sure he knows his stuff. So he's been a resident of Wickenburg for 30 years, and he conducts tours for the museum throughout the surrounding area. And the town, of course, is a setting for an amazingly rich history, so we're looking forward to hearing from him today. Please join me in welcoming Joe Stevens.
Thank you, Lisa. Thank you for having me, and thank you all for being here this morning. As she said, we're going to take a little look at the town of history and its Wickenburg, and I apologize ahead of time in that I have a pointer, but it won't work on these TV screens, so we'll deal with that as we go along. Okay. You notice on this screen is the site of the building in Wickenburg. It's actually the theater in Wickenburg, and I don't think you'll find a vacant wall in Wickenburg that doesn't have a mural on it. And this one, of course, shows a lot of our original mining history, as well as cowboy history and the train coming through town. But I think the most important part about this particular graphic is up above that saguaro cactus, it says founded in 1863. So that's where our history began. But I'm going to take you way back, some almost 40 years before that, to the 1830s, when these two men were mountain men, and they were in eastern Arizona together on the Gila River. That much we know. The guy on the top left is Pauline Weaver. His original name was Powell Weaver. Then he changed that to Pauline. And he spent a lot of time in the Southwest, and with the Spanish influence, he changed it to Paulino. So you'll hear me probably refer to him most of the time as Paulino. He could not read, he could not write. So therefore, chronicling where he was and what he did is really hard to follow, really hard. The fellow on the bottom right, Joseph Walker, was one heck of an explorer and mountain man. Now, as I say, both of these men were along the Gila River, but we know for a fact that Walker, who was literate, but didn't bother to write anything down, was in the buggy on Rim. He was with the Hopi Indians. Were these guys together at that time? We don't know. Did they explore more of Arizona than just that area? We don't know. But Walker grew up in Missouri. And I might point out, this is an unusual picture of Pauline Weaver with the clothing that he has on, because normally he would look more like Walker in buckskin clothing. Okay? Now, a sidebar on Pauline Weaver. His mother was Cherokee Indian. He grew up in Tennessee. In Tennessee, the winters are kind of rough, a little bit muggy and cold. His mother made him take a bath once a week. How many of you remember those days? He equated taking a bath with catching the death of a cold. Imagine being here in Arizona in buckskins in the summertime. In France, they invented perfume. Walker was an explorer extraordinaire. Grew up in Missouri. He, in 1829, traversed southern Arizona and went all the way to LA, one of the first guys to the Pacific. He traversed in 1833 across the Sierras to the Pacific, just north of Yosemite. Now, if any of you have been in that neck of the woods, that is huge granite boulders. The trek across there is just absolutely incredible. And it's chronicled in this book, The Western Man. And I recommend this to you. It's by Bill Gilbert. This chronicles a lot of the Scotch-Irish history across our United States, and then focuses in on Joseph Walker. Now, we're talking about 1849 and that four-letter word, G-O-L-D, and California. Well, we know that Walker was in California at the time, and he had some relatives there with him. With the relatives, he went into the freighting business. But Walker himself would go round up the Spanish cattle that were running wild and he would round up horse flesh that was running wild. So they actually provided the food and the transportation and horses for those miners that were there. A better way to make money than digging in the ground. Pauline Weaver, he guided between Santa Fe and California. He understood the desert, how to live in it, and how to find water. So that was really an important part. Now comes the Civil War, 1861 to 65. Walker spent most all of his time, all of his adult life in the southwest United States. So while he grew up in Missouri, which was considered Southern, Confederate, we don't think he really had much impact on, was not impacted much by that war. He was all over. The man roved constantly. And think about how much shoe leather they had to wear out. It's unbelievable. What he did cross the Colorado River leaving California, where you can't cross it today because it's where the Virgin River runs into Colorado, and that's underneath Lake Mead today. He came along the south of the Colorado River in order to go back and visit his Hopi friends 30 years after he had originally been there. He continued on into Colorado with his group, and he always had 20, 25 men with him, and they were mainly miners, although he wasn't particularly. When he got into Colorado, the Union Army there figured he was a Southern sympathizer and was going to get silver, mine silver, and send it back to the Confederacy. And they decided that wasn't a good idea. Well, again, there was no real understanding that he had any sympathy with the Confederacy. But they sent him down to Santa Fe. Now in Santa Fe there was a general by the name of Carleton, and General Carleton and Walker had been together. Walker had guided him many different times. Carleton would not come out to receive him. Walker spent a week and a half in the Santa Fe area and never did see Carleton, although Carleton did not restrict his movements. He decided to head west, and he headed toward Tucson. And the story of getting through Apache Pass is chronicled in the Western Man book, and it's a story that's quite interesting indeed. It took him a week and a half to get through the Apaches in that neck of the woods. Now, is there mineral in Tucson? Yes, there's copper. Was copper of any value in 1861 or 2?
Absolutely not.
Not really. Electricity hadn't been invented yet, right? So, in fact, a sidebar here, the first copper from the Tucson area was taken to Guaymas, Mexico, put on a boat, and shipped all the way to Wales, where there was a smelter. Not economically very viable, was it? Now, there's one line in this book, The Western Man, that says, "I will take you where there's gold." One line. And Walker takes his men up to the Gila, west along the Gila to the Hacienda River. If you ever driven across I-10 across the Hacienda River, you look at that and you go, what a godforsaken location this is. But he went up the Hacienda, went right past where Wickenburg is today, nothing there. He found two creeks, one named Lynx Creek and the other named Granite Creek. And that was the founders of present-day Prescott. So that was Walker. A little sidebar here on that. Although Walker was not particularly a miner, but the men with him were, they brought the California mining laws with them to Prescott. And the California mining laws said that no Mexican could have any property along a river bottom where there were placer mining. The result is, Prescott for many years called itself the whitest town in Arizona. Weaver guided between between Santa Fe and Southern California. He had a ranch in the San Bernardino area, but he heard about gold being found in the late 1850s, early 1860s along the Colorado River and along the Gila River. The Gila played out pretty quickly, but he prospected all the way north along the Colorado River up to the Bill Williams, which is above Parker, all the way east in that neck of the woods. And to this very day, that entire area is known as Weaver Mining District Number 1. Still to this day. While there, 3 men came from California, and they were known as the People's Party, P-E-E-P-L-E-S. And those 3 men ran into Weaver, and that's kind of interesting also because Weaver didn't like towns. Weaver never slept in a hotel. He slept outside under the stars. In inclement weather, he just had a tarp put over himself. That was a tough way to live, these guys, I tell you. These 3 men met with him and said, we want you to take us into central Arizona, mining for gold. Now, at that time, central Arizona was known as Terra Incognito. Not a place you wanted to go, particularly. And so Weaver said, how many are you? And they said, 3. And he said, no, you got to have more people than 3. And the result is that they rounded up a total of 10 men. One of those men was a fellow by the name of Henry Wickenburg. I don't know his name. Let's take a little sidebar here and talk just briefly about Henry Wickenburg. He was born in 1819 in Prussia. That's Germany. He spoke German. He and his brother had a farm, and on that farm was a coal mine. Now, the Prussian government federalized the coal mine so that they, even though it was on their property, were not allowed to mine coal on their own mine. Winter was harsh, coal was sparse, brothers went into the mine anyway and were caught. The penalty was not a nice thing, and so they both left. Now, we have no knowledge of the brother. We first catch up with Henry himself in 1847 when he's in New York City. The next time we hear about Henry Wickenburg, he's on a steamship as a fireman, stoking the coals of the burner to produce the power to produce steam to move that ship. And he's off the coast of California. Okay. So, how did he get there? Well, most people think of people going to the gold rush with the Conestoga wagon because that's been so glorified by our TVs. But the reality is no. Most people lived along the coastlines or along rivers, and they took ships. Now, think of that. Did they have refrigeration on these ships? No. How did you get food? How much water could you carry on those old boats? They weren't much for the kinds of ship we think about today. So they had to stop at ports all along the way to get supplies. And was the water good or was it not good? Was it potable or wasn't it? Was there proper kinds of wood or coal to fuel those burners on those steamships? It was quite a job. And it was a couple months process to get to those gold fields in California. Now, he must have gotten off the ship in California because the next time we hear him, he's one of the 10 men on the manifest of Weaver and People's Party. And he talks to the People's Party and Weaver and says, oh, by the way, last year I was in central Arizona and I found gold and I'll take you to where it's at. They said, what? He said, oh yeah, he said, I couldn't stay long because of the Indians, so I left and went to Tucson. Now, today it's a 4-hour drive from Wickenburg to Tucson. Where are you at? How in the world? Horseback? Probably, but still a tough trek through the desert. So now he's from Tucson all the way over to Yuma. Again, another trek through the desert. So here's what happened. Now let's walk through this. On the left-hand side, that dark black line, starting in the bottom left is where Yuma would be, and that's the Colorado River going on north and south. When you get back up, you see a line going to the right, and that's the Bill Williams River, heading into a couple different creeks, but one is called Date Creek. I think you can see that. And then it comes over to the hills that are north of Wickenburg today. Okay? Now the dotted line from the bottom left coming up past what's said to be Black Mountain is the route of travel. And this particular map says Ben McClendon's Treasure Trail. Well, Ben McClendon was a black man. And he had to be very well respected because Ben was on the manifest of the 10 people that came. Now we know there were Mexican people with this party because they wrangled horses and the animals. They were not on the manifest. Now let's follow along here. You'll see the word Rich Hill. But initially on the west side of that hill, they shot 3 antelope. Now today, antelope are way up north of Prescott, not down south where we are. And so they named the peak Antelope Peak, and they named the creek on that side Antelope Creek. They panned it, they found gold. For some reason, they went around the south side of that peak to the other side, and they must have bumped into Yavapai Indians because they named the creek Indian Creek. To this day, still Indian Creek. They panned that creek and were rewarded with a lot of good placer gold. Okay? Now, they had the wranglers with them, as I said, and those wranglers had heard that there were some fellow Spanish speakers to the north. Probably Yavapais that picked up some of the language. And so they went to visit. And on the way back that night, they came into camp like this, yelling, "Minerales, minerales." And they had potato-sized nuggets of gold on hand. One of the richest finds of freestanding gold anywhere in the world, right on top of that peak. And needless to say, the name changed. Rich Hill. And that's what it's still called today. Yeah. Now, there's also a tale that suggests that the remuda of horses got loose and ran to the top of that peak. Well, I've been on top of that mountain twice. It is a boulder field. There's no way that an animal could run up it. Just no way. In fact, on the west side, there's a trail that was put in later. And it's a trail I would never walk in the summertime because the boulders on the downhill side are over my head. And on the uphill side, they're way over my head. So you're literally in the gully going up that peak. So, now, to the north of the word Rich Hill, you can see a little term called Peoples Valley, and it's spelled P-E-O-P-L-E-S, they're spelled wrong. But this is named after Abraham Peoples. It's slightly higher in elevation than Wickenburg itself. The Hassayampa River is the black line on the right-hand side that drops down to Wickenburg. And at where that line starts is the southeast end of Peoples Valley, and there it is the mountain range, and from there to Wickenburg is all mountainous, and it's a solid canyon that the water runs through heading to Wickenburg. It's a canyon the whole way down. I've ridden it on horseback or hiked most all of that length, and it's a canyon the whole way. Now they chose to build a dam at that location, and that dam was 110 feet high. It was of rock and earth. The 3 different superintendents of that mine that they had were never well qualified in dam building. They were not hydrologists in any way, shape, or form. They were suggested to take the spillway and to put it out off of another creek where it could drop into the river at another location, but nah, they decided to put the spillway right along the right-hand side of the dam, and it dropped in right at the base of this dam. Poorly constructed. They had some wooden slots that they were supposed to be able to lift out to let water over the dam, but wood swells with water.
Yeah.
So, Henry was told that there was gold in the Harquahala Mountains by the Yavapai Indians. And he left with 2 other men. Now you see, as soon as that word G-O-L-D is heard throughout the area, people flock to the area. There ended up being somewhere between around 20,000 mainly men between Wickenburg and Prescott in the late 1800s. So that's what the focus there. The Indians told them there was gold in the Harquahalas, and those mountains are west of Wickenburg, just west of Aguila. And the Gila didn't exist back then. Wickenburg and the two other men named Ruskin and a man named Van Bibber, went to the Harquahalas. They did not find gold. There was some gold there. They did not find it. They were running out of water, and so they headed east to go to the Hassayampa River for water. And along the way, they ran into this outcropping of white quartz rock just sticking up out of nowhere in the middle of the desert. They began chipping away at it, and it's quartz rock, and quartz and gold are normally associated. And they found some gold within that quartz rock. They continued on to the river, and the two guys with Wickenburg didn't want anything to do with it. But Wickenburg thought that looked pretty enticing, so he stayed along the river bottom. Now, in those days, the river bottom in Wickenburg was lush topsoil with a bubbling brook running through it, unlike the sand wash it is today. Henry is a farmer at heart. What a perfect place to farm. In fact, just south of the current bridge in Wickenburg today, just south of it, there was actually a pond there that had cattails growing in along the river bottom. And it was a rancheria for the Yavapai Indians. They would spend time in the winter there. In the spring, they would plant the Three Sisters, corn, beans, and squash. Go away for the summer into the hills, return in the fall hoping to find that the river had been nice to them and produce some crops. Now, Henry would hydrate those crops. He'd steal them. And so he began to produce a farm in the area, and he decided to build a home along the hillside there. Now, he built the home out of wood, but he was afraid that because he'd been stealing food from the Indians, that they were going to burn him up. And so he dug a tunnel through the hillside to the other side and put his corrals on the other side of the hill. He never had to use the tunnel for the purpose of which he built it, but it was a great spot to spend summertime, cooler, and to store vegetable items as well. So that is how that went on down. Now, let's go back to the vulture. He would go back to the mine, and why did it become the vulture? Strange name. Well, that outcropping of quartz rock, the vultures would perch on it, they'd roost on it. So immediately it named. There's also a peak nearby that has been coined as Vulture Peak, but it's just been coined that as a nearby place. Now he'd chip away at that rock, bring it back to the river. Now, you have to break that quartz up in order to extract the gold. And if you use a hammer, chips fly everywhere, right? So how in the world do you handle that? The other thing is that now people flocked into the area. He would allow people to take their team animals and their wagon to go to that mine site, to that quartz rock, to load their wagons. Some say for $15 a ton. Well, how do you measure a ton out in the middle of the desert? So others say $15 a wagon. I'm guessing that's probably the right words. So they would go chip the rock, put it in their wagon, bring it back to the Hassayampa River. Needed water, right? Now, how do they crush that rock? Obviously, Henry Wickenburg had been on a steamship in California, so we knew all about steam. But instead, we used something called an arrastra, and I'll describe it for you in a minute. But why didn't we have steam? Well, think about a locomotive engine. Steam boilers are huge metal objects that have to contain a lot of pressure, so they have to be well constructed, and they are heavy. Until the railroad came, you couldn't transport them. And even once the railroad came, you had to have a pretty stout wagon to carry them any distance to a mine. So that's why steam wasn't used. The arrastra, primitive method. Along the river bottom, you would clean a space, an area, sweep it clean, literally. You'd put a hole in the center with a crossbar on it. You'd put a pile of rocks around that, outside that hole in the center. Now you take and you wet strips of leather, you tie them with a crossbar, you tie them to granite or lava, heavy, strong, solid rock pieces, stones. And you then put an animal on it, you put your quartz rock inside, put an animal on the outside and walk it around that circle, that heavy rocks hanging away, crushing that quartz to extract the gold. Primitive means to do it. Then you would have to take it, sweep it out, hand it in the river in order to get the gold. In later years, they also would use mercury to extract the gold. But primitive means that's all they had. There was said to be some 45 arastras on the river bottom of the Hassayampa River. I know where there's one today. Most all of them have been washed away by floods. Now, as I said, Wickenburg built his home along there, and he also plotted the town map. Now, this slide graphic should probably say mining towns, not just gold towns. Usually become ghost towns. And think about it. We have one just outside of Wickenburg called the Vulture. It's a ghost town today. And it's one that you can visit, by the way. It's only 12 miles out of town. They've reconstructed some of the facilities that were there. There's a lot of mining equipment that's there that's really of interest. In fact, the head frame, original head frame on one of the shafts is still there and can be seen how it works. The mine itself, and I've been down that shaft to 750 feet where it's water. There are only 4 levels that went off all the way down to that. Normally there's a level every 100 feet. And you can walk in and see how they mined up using gravity to come down. The first thing that was interesting it's an incline of 30 degrees. And the first thing is you stepped into the tunnel, you had to have good lights because here's this gaping hole and the tracks run across it. And you had to literally duck walk across the tracks to get across this 6-8 foot diameter hole. What's the hole for? Well, when you brought your cart of ore out, you parked it on top and you dumped it. And it went down to where it landed right on top of a trapdoor for where the bucket came from up top. Now you open the trapdoor, you load the bucket, and you lift it out. So that's how it all works. It was a pretty interesting experience, believe me. So as I say, you can go to the Vulture today. It's I think about $10 to get in, and it's interesting to see, especially all the equipment that's still there. It's really fun. Now, mining is what started the Wickenburg town, as you can tell, but you had to feed those miners. Our river bottom had great topsoil, but it wasn't a lot of it, and you got to have hay. You've got to have food. So how in the world would you do that? So the mercantile industry, the ranching and the farming began, but in order to get enough crops to feed those people, those miners, men would take wagons, teamsters would take wagons, and they would go all the way to Maricopa Wells, where there were some farmers farming, Mexican farmers as well, and the Maricopa and Pima Indians farming, and get supplies to bring all the way back to Wickenburg. So that's how they fed those farmers. Now, those miners. Now, one of those fellas, a guy by the name of Jack Swilling, he's a character unto himself. He was a teamster, and for some reason he got up on the side of South Mountain with his team. Jack had been a Confederate, but then he decided he was Union. He was addicted to opium. Maybe that's why he was on the side of South Mountain, who knows. Regardless of that, he looked out to the north and to the east, and he noticed these dark strips with vegetation on them coming from the river area out across the lush desert. Jack went back to Wickenburg and explained that to Henry Wickenburg and a few other gentlemen. And the total of 7 guys put money together because they realized these had been the old Hohokam canals that were abandoned in the 1400s. They had filled in with topsoil, but still there was water going through them such that the vegetation could grow differently than the surrounding desert. They pooled money. One guy was actually from Yuma, and they pooled their money and sent a team of men to the Salt River. Now you're all familiar with Sky Harbor Airport. There's east-west runways on the north side of the terminal, on the south side of the terminal. And the south side, on the east end of it, ends right at the Salt River. And that's where the first 2 canals were that were excavated. These men, the one canal literally went down that runway all the way to 16th Street. And the other one went diagonally northwest out towards 16th Street. Those were the first 2 canals that were excavated. And they were excavated by people from Wickenburg. So 7 years after Wickenburg was founded, we were the founding fathers of the town of Phoenix. Now, the town of Levi. Not Levi today, it's Mesa today. More canals than the Mormons cleared those all out. Tempe, Hayden Mill, in that area. So all those different canal companies were formed and made that into a lush area to produce crops, primarily to feed the miners, those 20,000 guys on the way to Preston. So we've talked about our town and its development along Hacienda, initially with the Arrastras that were there. And now I should have another line here that I don't have in here, but it is in 1890, that dam I was telling you about burst. 110-foot wall of water coming down the canyon, a narrow gorge canyon, with very few places where it could spread out and all the decreasing height. When it got, I've got a good friend of mine who wrote a book on that, and he's an engineer. And Jim figures that the height of the water when it reached the upper part of Wickenburg was still 40 feet high. The river bottom was lush in topsoil. Farmers were there, animals were there. North of Wickenburg, they were building a second dam site in order to put in a flume to physically use water to blast out the gold of the rock, as they've done in California. There were Chinese that were working that dam site. There was no warning of this flood. The Chinese only remains were parts of body pieces. It's the greatest disaster in Arizona history, until possibly the airplane crashes in the Grand Canyon. But other than that, this was the greatest in Arizona history. So the topsoil was gone now in Wickenburg, and that's why we have a sand wash today. Henry Wickenburg's farmland gone. Now Henry had totally been against the railroad coming through his property, which they wanted to do. But he wanted them to go to the Vulture Mine. He wanted to go around it. Now he had no topsoil. He had no farm. So he said, go ahead and put the railroad through our town. So now the railroad parallels the Hacienda River about a quarter mile away from the river in most places and goes south and then follows Grand Avenue, which was the old wagon trail between Phoenix and Wickenburg. So then comes the automobile in the early 1900s. Now think about this, Models A and Model T, 70 miles from downtown Wickenburg to downtown Phoenix. How long would it take you to go those 70 miles in a Model A or Model T on the kinds of wagon roads that there were in those days? Well, it's probably about a day's drive, right? Even if you got in mid-afternoon, you wouldn't want to continue west because there was nothing there until you got to the Colorado River. Okay, so with that came highways, Highway 60 from Phoenix to California, Highway 89 from Wickenburg to Prescott and Flagstaff. And the only way to get from Phoenix to either of those locations was via Wickenburg. The result is an expanded highway system, hotels, restaurants, garages sprang up. A couple of interesting sidebars there. One is that there was a hotel in town called the Baxter, and it was where these people from Phoenix would stop on their way west. Then they'd get talking to the ownership, and the question always was, well, where can we stay in Blythe? Where can we stay in Palm Springs? You know, where do we eat? All those kinds of things, normal. Well, the folks from the Baxter Hotel decided, hey, we need to take a trip. They went to California. But along the way, they stopped at the different hotels and motels that were along the, or hotels in those days, they're all hotels in those days. Stopped along the way, decided which ones were good and which ones were not. When they came back, they formed a group, a chain of hotels. That hotel chain exists today. One of those hotels is still in Wickenburg, and it's called the Best Western. Another interesting sidebar. As you come into Wickenburg from Phoenix, you cross the bridge and do the roundabout into town, and immediately on the right-hand side, there's a really neat old building that was the Texas Hotel. Downstairs was a restaurant. Upstairs was hotel rooms. You can still go up. Those rooms are full of antiques because it's an antique store today. But the exterior has all been redone to look just like it did in the old days. And it's even got little veranda porches off of the rooms upstairs to where you could open a door and let a breeze through in the hot summer days. One day, a gentleman knocked on the back door of the restaurant and asked if he could work for food. And he spent a couple days there and then left. His name, Del Webb. Another interesting side. Okay, and then another way that the town reinvigorated itself was in the 1920s timeframe, 1924 specifically, guest ranches. And here you see these stars all represent where the guest ranches were located. There were some 13 of them in total. And notice in the upper right, this says DCWM Guest Ranch Tour. That's Desert Caballeros Western Museum that I'm representing today. And I do guest ranch tour in January and in February of these different locations. Two of these locations we cannot go to. We can go to the exterior of them because they are a major treatment center for all kinds of addictions. Okay? Now think about it. A guest ranch has a dining area, a kitchen area, meeting rooms, and bedrooms. And they're remote. It's perfect for a treatment center. And it's interesting, our town doesn't pay any attention to these treatment centers. We know Rush Limbaugh was there. Nobody knew. One day, our editor of our newspaper got a phone call from the Arizona, they call it Republic, I call it something else. And he said, get out to the airport and get a picture. Kate Moss is coming in for treatment. And Kevin said, why? Well, it's Kate Moss, we want a picture. He hung up the phone. So we don't know what goes on in those locations, and the people that work there are a lot of them, and it's a great industry for our town. There are still 3 active guest ranches in town. The KL Bar, and they cater mainly to horseback riding. The Flying E Ranch not only caters to horseback, but also ATV, and they have now put the town of Wickenburg on the map in a town called Nashville, Tennessee. Because we've got a fabulous performance area there, and the country artists absolutely love coming to Wickenburg. Now think about it. If you're a country artist, any singer, and you come to Phoenix, where do they stick you? In a hotel. Can you get out of that room without being mobbed? No. You go to this place, yeah, sure there's some other people at the guest ranch, but you know, once you've said hello, it's pretty much over. And now they're ATVing, they're horseback riding, they're doing all kinds of fun stuff in the desert. Plus, they've got a great performance venue. And so if you haven't, come on out, check out the Flying E Ranch and its performing. And the third one is Rancho de los Caballeros, a fabulous 18-hole golf course for those of you who are golfers. And in addition to that, it's got new ownership, and that new ownership is revamping the place and making it into a 5-star to compete with Scottsdale. And I think they're going to be able to do it. So it's really, really pretty neat. The term Alt-Wickenburg Way, you may have heard, and here's exactly where it originated. Now this is a photo of the Ramona Ranch. Notice on the hillside there are buildings all the way across the top. And you see in the background the Hassayampa River, and it's in flood stage, which is very unusual, normally a sand wash. But I love this photo. Look at, there are fence lines, but these cars and trucks are all parked up against the fence line, making it a really impenetrable barrier for the animals that are going to come out of those bucket chutes that are on the right-hand side. But straight across, there's an area with no cars, a few men standing along the fence, but above it, those are bleachers for people to watch this rodeo event going on. Now, this was a big deal. This rodeo at Remuda Ranch was the first on the United States, not Arizona, but on the whole United States winter circuit for cowboys. As I said, a huge, huge event. In the 30s, there was a cowboy who became the national champion. His name was Everett Bowman. He was a champion for several years, all around cowboy. But in these days, the rodeos didn't necessarily pay the cowboys. You might get paid, you might not. So Everett Bowman put a bunch of these cowboys together, and they formed the first union of cowboys. They called themselves the Turtles for some reason. The Turtles turned into the Rodeo Cowboy Association, and now today it's called the PRCA, the Professional Rodeo Cowboys Association. So this particular rodeo, the first in the series, is actually the beginning of what happens in Las Vegas today, the National Finals Rodeo, right here out in Wickenburg Lane. A good friend of mine who's passed now, grew up on Remuda Ranch, and he could remember there weren't any cars in the bottom left by the river. And he could remember there was no 8-second rule. You either rode them until they were subdued or you got bucked off. And he said he could remember horses leaving those bucking chutes and still bucking, and they all the way down in the earth again. So pretty cool. Okay, let's look at present day Wickenburg, shall we? We've got a great hospital. It has a surgical center now. Lots of knees and hips are being done in Wickenburg because they've got state-of-the-art equipment. We've now got a remote urgent care. So you don't need to go to the ER, but you do need some kind of assistance, and that's available as well. Doctors from the valley, from Sun City area, etc., your area here, come to Wickenburg on a regular basis. So you name it, the gamut of care is all there. The Hassayampa River Preserve is on the south side of Wickenburg as you come up Highway 60 to the town. That's a location where water runs on the surface all year round. Why? Well, the reason is there's an underground granite outcropping of rock. The water can't get under it, it can't get around it, it must go over it. The reality is Wickenburg sits on an underground lake of water. Yeah. Now, water, desert, riparian area, animals, it's a cool area to go check out different animals. But it's a birder's paradise, known not just in the United States, but across the world, because there are birds that can be found there that aren't found elsewhere. So people come routinely. The Del Webb Center for the Performing Arts is at our high school, so high school kids get to use it and get to learn about the ropes of working in theater. But also, I don't know how many of you may have come up to this, but the performances are everything from opera to country to dance, you name it. They're putting out their venue for this coming year, next week. Go online and look it up. It's great because people come up from, it's mainly Sun City people that show up because it's a 35-minute drive. It's free parking. It's a great show. They'll come up, have dinner first at one of our great restaurants. Then go ahead and watch the show. And in 35 minutes, there's no traffic going home, no I-10 to fight, no Tempe traffic to fight. It's ideal, and it's a great, great venue. Wickenburg Ranch is a trilogy community. It's just northwest of town, and it's part of Wickenburg, the town itself, and it's got about 3,000 homes that will end up being part of that community. Very active community. The Desert Caballeros Western Museum that I'm here representing today is a fabulous Western museum with art, as well as history. We're in the process of building a brand new facility. $27 million has been raised in our little town. And it will be across the street, so the corner of our, main corner of our town will have the museum on two sides, and it'll be a great entry to our town. That new facility will be dedicated to art. The current facility will be dedicated to history. So it's going to be really great. I think there's a lot of history that we don't talk about yet because we don't have room. There's Mexican history. Heck, our town was at least 50% Mexican for most of its life and still is today. So there's a lot of history there. There's Indian history, which we seldom get to talk about. So it's going to be fun to see what happens there. We also have something at the museum called Cowgirl Up. You heard about Cowboy Artists of America, and that's all men. They didn't let the ladies in. And in fact, in the old days, a lot of women artists would use a man's name when they signed it so that it could sell. Because otherwise it didn't sell. Well, we've got $1 million endowment from one of our people in town to procure that early female women's art. And that'll be resident in the new building. But we also have Cowgirl Up, which is the end of March, and that features 60 current women artists, Western artists. If you haven't been up to that show, it is fabulous. So come up, check it out online. It'll be probably the last weekend of March. And Friday, they'll do miniatures. Saturday, they'll auction off, they'll sell the full-size pictures. Sunday morning, 90 minutes, these women produce an unbelievable piece of art on the sidewalk out in front of the museum. You watch it from start to finish, from a blank sheet to a finished piece of art, and then that gets auctioned off. It's a fabulous, fabulous show. And the last but not least, we are now the team roping capital of the world. They're already showing up. And again, you have to go through Wickenburg in order to get to the National Finals Rodeo in Las Vegas because you qualified in Wickenburg. And then you go. So October, November, our town will be full of horses, trailers, etc. And they're all team ropers. Well, I've been in town for 32 years, my wife and I. Let me tell you what's happened in those 32 years. That hospital, yeah, we had a hospital, and we had 1 or 2 doctors, and a couple folks that came up from the valley. No surgical center, no outpatient care, none of the numbers of physicians that put it in. Hacienda River Preserve, yes, it existed, but was not known like it is today. Wickenburg Ranch didn't exist. Del Webb Center for the Performing Arts did not exist. The museum had 3 employees, no Cowgirl Up. And team roping, there was one guy on the outskirts of town that held a roping once a week. That was it. So where in the world are we going next? Wickenburg is a thriving location, it's a growing location, there's just lots to see and do, so come on up and visit us. We'd love to have you, especially to come to our museum. Thank you very much. Questions? Yes, sir. Yes, ma'am.
The Wickenburg massacre?
Yep.
Can you speak on that?
Yeah, to a degree.
Okay.
There's a site called the Wickenburg Massacre site. Frederick Loring was on a stagecoach. They'd come from Prescott. There were several other folks on board, and I'm not remembering all the names. And they were hijacked going west out of town. And Loring himself was killed. Only 2 people off that stage survived. They were ambushed by people dressed as Indians. However, those Indians did a couple things that Indians would not do. They took the harness off a dead horse and coiled it like a teamster would coil it. An Indian wouldn't care about a harness. The Indians were said to have done the dirty deed. General Crook had rounded up the Yavapais onto a reservation at Camp Date Creek north of town. He actually killed several Yavapai Most of us don't think it was ever the alibi that did it. You go on to YouTube, though, at our museum, and you'll find a really interesting hour-long discussion between people about the massacre. There's a site that they suggest is where the massacre occurred. It's on a sand wash, and yes, stages did use sand washes, but the reality is it's going west to Aguila. South of our town, there's a hard rock road that goes all the way to Aguila. Why would they be in a sand wash? So, a lot of questions. Any other questions? Yes?
So you've been in Wickenburg for 35 years, you said. 32, excuse me. Can you tell us how you got involved with the museum initially and how that's grown over time? I know you're...
My wife and I were full-time RVers, having left Montana, and looking for a place to live, and every place we thought we wanted to live, we found out we didn't. We came into Arizona, actually heading west to visit Dad in Southern California, and drove into Wickenburg July 20th, and never left. Had anyone told me I live in the desert, I'd have told them they were nuts. But here we are, and love it. Well, absolutely love it. There was a young fella at the museum who was the education curator, and he was a real dynamic young man, full of fun, full of learning. And so a group of us joined the museum and went through training to become a docent, and just had a lot of fun doing that kind of thing. That's where the outside the walls tours that I do. I don't only do the guest ranch tour, I do a mining tour, I do a ghost towns tour, we do Dutch oven cooking. We've done Baghdad mine, but unfortunately mine won't let us in anymore. I did Palo Verde one time, and now they won't let us in anymore. Yeah. So that's kind of the answer. Yes?
And then what does the connection with the Heritage Center here look like for you?
Other than being another museum, I don't say that there is.
Oh, okay. I just
So Lisa had contacted, someone I think within your group, may not be here today, may have recommended that you check out what we had. This presentation's never been given before. I'll play with it and fix it up a little bit. Yes, ma'am.
I was wondering if they're still pulling gold out of Henry Wickenburg's Vulture mine. I heard years ago that every once in a while they would lease it off to some group that had delusions of refinding the vein of gold.
The biggest problem is water.
Oh.
At 750 feet, you hit water. That means that mine is over 1,300 feet deep. But all those levels, everything below 750 is full of water. Now you can dewater a mine by just pumping it out. However, it's been long enough that those tunnels would all be caved in. They'd be dangerous as can be. You wouldn't want to do it. But when you go to Vulture City to view the city part of it and all of the mining gear that's there, you can't get to the mine itself because they are actively open pit mining it today. Actively. Sure.
What does Harquahela mean?
With water. Harqua, there's the Harqua Vars without water and the Harquahela with water. Yes, Brian.
You know, the jail tree is so fascinating. Now, is that a true thing? And if it is, can you just tell? Because it's so interesting.
In the corner of town, with the main traffic light in town, there's a little park, and it's called Jail Tree Park. And there's a big old mesquite that's been there since the 1800s. And we didn't have a hooskow in town, or jail. So they would simply chain a person to the jail tree. And you know, I sometimes think that'd be really a smart thing to do in young punks today. People would throw rotten eggs at them. But yes, it was a jail tree, and it's cool. One of the things we also had in town is another one of our past residents had these statues built that tell history. And Marshall Trimble actually does the narrating, so you
Yes.
push a button while you're
Yeah.
next to the statue and it'll tell you the history of the town, that particular section. They're neat, and they're throughout town. And there's one at the jail tree with a guy chained up. A number of people get pictures taken with that guy. It's unbelievable. He's popular. Anyone else? Sir?
Yeah, you did an excellent job. That was just fantastic. If anybody hasn't done it, I have a friend that's a docent in Litchfield and has the whole development of the Goodyear family from start to finish and how it's being renovated up on the hill. I highly recommend that you take that in also. You would find it,
That'd be fascinating.
the rubber plantation that was there during the heyday,
Yep.
your jaw drops and said, I didn't believe that.
Oh, yeah. That's how you got your name.
Yeah.
Goodyear rubber.
Yeah.
Yeah. In fact, another sidebar, it's somewhat related to Wickenburg, but General Patton, knowing he was going to the deserts of North Africa, trained his troops not only west of Blythe up on top of the hill there, but he was also just south of, well, he was in the Mouse area, and he was also just north of Wendon, and where he had another encampment. And an interesting story is, they were out running around the desert, they kept having flat tires. And the reason is, if you go to a grease slit and break it off, it'll almost always break off in a sharp point. They're running over these grease slits with their trucks and their Jeeps and getting flats. So he put in a request for a better grade of tire. Here's Goodyear.
Big time.
Yeah.
Where do we find information about the other tours that you offer?
Go online to the Desert Caballeros Western Museum. Yes. And as I say, this coming winter's tours haven't been put out yet. I'm going to be working on that next week.
Great.
Well, again, folks, thank you very much. I appreciate it.